Hi, my name is Lecture Norwood, and this is my Manipulatives lesson for my Math for Teachers class. Today I'm going to teach a short lesson on an introduction on fractions. Alrighty, so to start, let's define what a fraction is. A fraction is part of a group, number, or whole. There are two parts of a fraction. There's the numerator and the denominator. Generally, teachers use the analogy of Norman and the donkey to help students remember numerator and denominator. So we'll go over that. Norman is the numerator and donkey is the denominator. I drew a little Norman and donkey. Norman sits on his donkey. So, for example, if we had the fraction 1/10, the number on top, Norman is 1. So he was Norman, numerator is 1. And 10 is on the bottom, so that's the donkey. That means it's the denominator. Now that we know how to read a fraction, we would start by passing out the fraction bar sets to each student. We would begin with having them still as bars. Whenever we start the lesson, we'll have the students cut each piece out. That way they can physically see the pieces come apart and become pieces instead of wholes. But to pass it out and keep it clean, we'll pass them out as pieces, longer pieces like these. We would start by explaining that one full rectangle is 1, and we would show them that those two pieces here underneath it with the fractions 1/2 under them, if you put two of them together, it still equals 1. So they would be able to put the two pieces together and it'll be 1. The same thing as we would show them that 3 1/3 would be 1 whole. 4 1/4 is 1 whole, and 5 1/5 would be a single bar as well. This is helping them see what a whole looks like. That way when we break it down into pieces, they'll be able to see that we don't have a whole piece. So here we have where our fractions have been taken apart and we actually have pieces now. So now we've seen that our wholes have turned into halves and thirds, fourths, fifths, eighths, and so on. Before we begin comparing too much, we'll show the students how to turn things into different denominators. So we start with our whole again, and say we want to turn this half here into fourths. We'll have to count out how many fourths it will take to fill in that half to make it into fourths. And we see that there's only 2. This third one will make it too much. So now that we have changed our denominator from 2 to 4, say we need to make it into eighths. Denominator needing to be 8, we would count out 1, 2, 3, 4 eighths is equal to 2 fourths, which is equal to 1/2. Alright, we would continue with another example just so that they can really see and practice manipulating. So we would start with 1/3 and we want to make it into the sixes. So we would see how many sixths we need to make 1/3, and we would count out 2 because if we add one more it'll be too big. So we know that 1/3 is equal to 2 sixths. Say we needed to make that into 12s. We would count them out. 1/3 is also equal to 4 twelfths. After showing a few examples where we created things using our pieces, I would allow the students a little time to experiment on their own and compare things just to see like how many each thing needs to build stuff, just to compare the sizes for them to make the observations on their own. And then as a class, we would collectively share observations and we would correct any observations that were incorrect. Once the class has made their observations and we have like a good understanding of like how the fraction comparisons work and how to use our bars, I would begin to ask them questions where they can compare fractions. So I would ask, is 1/2 larger, smaller, or equal to 5/8, for example? And I'd allow them to pull out their pieces and draw or line them up and create the comparison where they could physically see that 5/8 is just slightly bigger than 1/2. So another way I would compare our fractions and let them use their bars I would ask which one's larger, 3/4 or 9/12. Most kids think the bigger number is going to be 12, but putting them pieces together, they would be able to see that 3/4 is actually equal to 9/12 instead of greater than or less than. At this point, after going over a few examples, I would hand out a worksheet that will allow me to assess what they've comprehended from the lesson. It'll ask them questions like which fraction's bigger, which fraction's smaller, is this fraction equal to, bigger, or smaller than the other one. This allows me to gauge whether or not they grasp the introduction to the fractions or not. And if they haven't and they still have some issues, we'll have to go over it again. As far as accommodations are concerned, for our SPED kids, I would probably ask them just to do 2 of the 3 questions for these and then pick 3 or 4 of these questions. And that way they still get tested on the stuff, but they have enough time to finish what they were asked of. As far as my GT kids though, I think I would ask them to see if they can solve these problems without our manipulatives. And if they can, that's awesome. If not, they are more than welcome to still use the manipulatives. This lesson is to allow them to use them. So that was my quick introduction to fractions for probably like a 7th grade level education. And those 2nd graders would be able to get a small dosage of algebra with just knowing how to do some fractions, and manipulatives are a fun way to keep them engaged in that lesson. I hope you enjoyed my video. Thank you for watching.